Welcome everybody to the A2A simulation Cessna 172R. The 172 is a popular trainer worldwide, and we're going to use this 172 to show you how to operate General Aviation airplanes in Flight Simulator. The simulator that I'm using is Prepared version 3.2, and the add-ins that I'm using is the A2A 172, ORBX NorCal scenery, and Active Sky Next for real-world weather. The hardware that I'm using is a Products Fighterstick, a Cessna Throttle Quadrant, or the Saitek Throttle Quadrant, Cessna trim wheel, and the Cessna rudder pedals, all from Saitek, and Track AR5 for head control. Now before I get into the airplane itself, I'd like to show you the settings. Options, settings, and you bring up that menu with the Alt key. And I'll just let you take a look at these. Some people are interested. Most of these are maxed out. And I'm operating on a GeForce 980 Ti Gaming Edition and an i7 4790K, and I have 8 gigabytes of RAM. And I use no traffic. Now down here with realism, this is very important for A2A planes. You gotta have all these sliders up here. Just make sure it mirrors this. And you want to turn off the crashes and damages. It's more of an annoyance than a realism factor in the sim. So I cancel out of that. Now you can get rid of this menu up here by holding down an Alt key. So you activate it with the Alt key and you hold down Alt to get rid of it. So now with the airplane, we'll briefly go over the main components of it and then go down from there. So right here we have the propeller, and then we have the spinner, and attached to the propeller is the engine, and then the engine is surrounded by the engine cowling. You got your fuselage, which is the majority of the airplane, and the cabin and cockpit where the people sit. You got your wings, left and right. You got your empennage and your tail section. You got 2 main wheels and a nose wheel for landing gear, and this is a tricycle gear configuration as opposed to a tail wheel where the wheel is on the tail. And now coming back here, with the tail section, you have a horizontal stabilizer and a vertical stabilizer. Attached to the vertical stabilizer is your rudder, and attached to the horizontal stabilizer is your elevator. Attached to the wings on the outside are the ailerons, and you can see they move opposite direction of each other for roll. And then going inside the airplane, you can see the control column, the yoke, and if you pull the yoke back, it moves the elevator up. If you push the yoke forward, it goes down. If you move the yoke or your stick left, it makes the airplane roll to the left, and if you move the yoke or your stick to the right, it makes the airplane roll to the right. The rudder pedals, you push left and right to make the rudder go left and right, which will make the airplane's nose go left and right. And then on the inside trailing edge of the airplane are your flaps, and as you can see, the flaps go down at the same time. This will increase lift and also increase drag. And these flaps, and most flaps, will go down in stages like this that you can select. So in the 172, they're at 10, 20, and 30 degrees. So you can go into the cockpit, and you could hear them moving, and you can see the position indicator move. So if you select the first notch, 10 degrees, see it move, and you can select 20 and 30, back up. Okay, so now that we've covered the flight controls on the outside, we'll talk about the flight instruments and the rest of the panel on the inside. So starting in the top left, we have the airspeed indicator, and the airspeed indicator is in knots as opposed to miles per hour. Some planes will have miles per hour. There's a green arc, a yellow arc, and a red line, and a white arc. The green arc is your normal operating range. The yellow arc is your caution range for when you're in smooth air only, and the red line is your never exceed speed. The white arc is your flaps operating range. If you operate the flaps higher than this, then the flaps could fail. The attitude indicator uses this orange airplane here to show your airplane's position against the horizon, blue being the sky, brown being the ground. When the engine starts up, this will stabilize and be flat. You have your altimeter that reads like a clock. The small hand reads in thousands and the big hand reads in hundreds. So right now this altimeter is showing 1,250 feet approximately. And now it's showing 1,100 and 1,000 feet. And then one more thing to point out is this little diamond here. This diamond is tens of thousands. So since we're at just above 900 feet, we're way below 10,000 feet, and so it's a lot closer to the 0 than the 1. If we're at about 12,000 feet, this diamond would be over here, somewhere in between the 1 and the 2, closer to the 1. Next, we have the vertical speed indicator. Tells you how fast you're going up or down in hundreds of feet per minute. So if this arrow is pointing to the 5 down here, you're going down 500 feet per minute. Next is the heading indicator. It's an instrument that you manually have to set to whatever the compass heading is, and then there's a nice heading bug on this one to give you a nice visual reference of what course you're supposed to fly. Next is the turn coordinator. It's a two-part instrument. This miniature airplane will point to your rate of turn, and so if this wingtip is pointing down here, then it's going to take you 2 minutes to make a 360-degree turn to the left. Same if this wingtip is pointing down here, 360-degree turn to the right in 2 minutes. The next part is the inclinometer. It's like a level ball, and you want this ball to be in the center to be for coordinated flight. If it's not coordinated, the airplane is either skidding or slipping, where the tail is kicking out or kicking in. And then you want to make sure there's no off flag. This is the off flag. When you have electrical turned on, that off flag goes away. Next, over here with your engine instruments, you have your fuel quantity, which is around 15 gallons in each wing. You have your oil temperature in degrees Fahrenheit and your oil pressure in pounds per square inch. Exhaust gas temperature, which is just that. Fuel flow in gallons per hour. Vacuum in inches of mercury powers these two instruments here. You have your ammeter, which shows a positive or negative charge on the battery. And if you look closely, you can see it's slightly negative because we have the battery on, but the engine's not on to turn the alternator, so we're slowly discharging the battery, so we can turn that off. This is the last engine instrument. It's the tachometer, and it shows the power output of the engine for this plane. It's got a green arc for normal operating in flight, and it's got a red line for never exceeding. These are our navigational instruments, and those will be covered in a later lesson. And then you have your radio stack. You have two communications radios, COM1 and COM2, two navigational radios, NAV1, NAV2. You have an automatic direction finder, which is linked to this instrument. You have a transponder, which sends data to ATC radar. You have an autopilot. You have a distance measuring equipment, and those navigational instruments will be covered in a later lesson. Coming down to here, we have circuit breakers with their amperage listed on the circuit breaker itself, with their powered system listed above it for ADF, autopilot, GPS. Coming down here, you have your ignition. Select your magnetos left, right, both, and you hold it over for starting. So we'll leave that one off. Master switch is this entire switch, and this switch is divided in the middle for battery on the right and alternator on the left. And so you can turn the battery on by itself, or in flight you can turn off the alternator by itself if that's causing trouble. Next you have your electrical switches for your fuel pump, your lights, and your pitot heat. Your avionics switch turns on and off the radio stack. So avionics switch is on, radios are on, avionics off, that stack is off. You have some cockpit lighting controls here. You have your throttle, push in for more power, pull back for less power. Mixture control, push in for rich, pull out for lean. Your flaps control, which we discussed earlier. Cabin heat, cabin air. You have your trim wheel, which is a small tab on the elevator, and its job is to relieve control pressure so you don't have to hold the stick or the yoke in a certain position all day. And you can see that little trim tab moving there as I move the trim wheel a lot. Down here is the fuel shutoff, pull for off. So right now the fuel won't be going to the engine, and so this allows it to get past this fuel shutoff here. So we usually just leave that in. This is a fuel selector valve. This is where you select which tank you're going to use. It's a left tank. It shows you has 26.5 gallons. Same with the right tank, and then both you have 53 gallons. We usually leave it on both for flight, but left tank for when we start up. And then lastly we have the rudder pedals and the brakes. So this is the parking brake engaged and parking brake disengaged. And then with the rudder pedals you can control the brakes by pressing at the top portion, the toe brakes. You can control them individually or both at the same time, whatever varying degree of braking power you need for each wheel. And that pretty much sums it up for the inside and outside of the airplane as an overview. So now I'll quickly go over more A2A specific menus. You hold down Shift 2, brings up the pilot's notes, and you have a checklist down here. Shift 3 is a controls menu and then some settings down here. Shift 4 is your payload and fuel manager. Shift 5 is navigation. Shift 6 is a basic radios menu. Shift 7 is your maintenance hangar, which is a really cool and unique feature with A2A simulations. Shift 8 is the walk around. And Shift 9 is an away from keyboard menu. So if you want the airplane, if you want the simulator to pause if there's an emergency or something like that. And so now we'll go over the pre-flight. Starting with the cabin. Here we're going to set the cold and dark, so it kind of resets everything. So pitot tube cover remove, and that's over here, remove before flight. We can go to the controls menu, Shift 3, press pitot cover, and it's gone. Pilot's operating handbook in the airplane, which is right here. And if you click on it, it brings up that Shift 2 menu, which is cool. Same thing down here with the chart. That brings up your Shift 5 navigation menu. Okay, so weight and balance check, that's the load manager. Making sure that this total weight is not above 2450, and the number will show red if it's over its max weight. Parking brake set, which it is. Control wheel lock remove, and so that's pressing this. That releases the control yoke so you can move it. And you can click over here at the base of the yokes to get rid of them, like that. Okay, control wheel. Ignition switch is off. Avionics master switch off. Battery master switch on. Pitot heat on, so we can make sure it actually warms up properly. Fuel quantity check, about 15 gallons. Avionics master on to make sure the radios work. Static pressure outsource valve off. That's this little valve down here, alternate static air, pull on. So if the static port gets clogged, we can activate this. So that's default to off. And then the annunciator panel test switch. This is our annunciator panel. It's like the warning lights. We click and drag it up to the test position, TST, make sure all the lights are working. Then we release the switch and we make sure that the appropriate lights remain on. So with the engine off, we don't have oil pressure, we don't have vacuum left or right. There's two vacuum pumps, and there's and there's a volts warning because the battery is on and losing energy. So that's all good. Now fuel selector both. Fuel shutoff valve on, which is pushing in, and then flaps extend. Pitot heat off, avionics master switch off, battery master switch off once those flaps go down. Okay, elevator trim set for a takeoff. We move the little white indicator to the takeoff triangle right there, and that's it for this part. You can either click on the next circle for where you want to go. You can hit A and Shift A to go back if you want, or you can click these arrows. So now we follow this black line. We're on the left wing. Pitot tube cover is removed. This is the pitot tube itself. Make sure it's warm, so press and hold this. Red is warm, blue is cold. And you can see with this button you can toggle it on and off, the cover. So now we move to the fuselage. Make sure the baggage door is locked. It is. Making sure the tail tie down is removed. Make sure all these points are intact that connect to the rudder, to the elevator. And then these for the rudder. And you can see the real world picture. It points to where it is on the airplane itself. And then you're making sure the trim tab has a little bit of wiggle to it. If you scroll down here, you can see the trim tab has a little bit of a wiggle. Making sure the VOR antennas are intact up there and making sure it's not damaged. Now to the right wing, we're checking the flaps. Light General Aviation airplanes will usually have a little bit of a wiggle like this in their flaps, and that's what you're checking for here. Then you check to make sure the flaps are on these two rollers, and you're making sure this actuator arm is intact. Now checking the right wing, you can move the aileron to make sure it moves freely. And if you look close, you can see this hinge here, and here, and here. And that's what you're checking here. Make sure all the nuts and bolts are in there, the screws. Then you got your tie down. Check the wing for damage. Now for the wheel, you want to make sure it's inflated. You want to make sure you have tread. This little safety pin is in, and remove the chocks. Now on each wing and then below the fuselage, we'll drain the fuel in this little sampling cup. You want to make sure it's light blue for 100 low lead. You want to make sure there's no clear water at the bottom, and you want to make sure there's no sediment. And if you do get water or sediment, you can click this drain more key until you get none of that anymore at the bottom. And sometimes that will happen in this simulation. Next is checking the fuel quantity. You unscrew this cap, put your dipstick in there, and you see we have just about 14 gallons. Go to the oil. You want at least 6 quarts of oil, and you want it to look like this light tan color. If it's looking black, it's dirty and needs to be changed. And if it's below 6, you can go into your payload manager and add oil. So this oil is good and we have more than enough. Checking the nose wheel. You want to make sure the tire's inflated, you got tread. Make sure there's at least 2 inches on the oleo strut, and then we got more fuel sumps here, here, and here. We're checking more fuel. Then you're checking the propeller to make sure there's no dents. Then we're making sure the air intake is clear. Making sure the static port is clear, and if it's not, you click this button. Making sure now we're on the left wing, fuel quantity, about just over 15 gallons. Left wing fuel sumps, looks good. The left wheel, inflation, tread, safety pin, chocks. And in the real world you can check the brakes on the other side as well. Then you got your tie down. This is the clear if the stall warning horn opening is clogged. And this is the clear the opening for the fuel tank vent. So if it's a full tank and it's a hot day, it's going to expand and a little bit of it will drip out to there. Then on the left wing, you're going to check the ailerons again, making sure those hinges are intact. And then the left wing flaps, making sure they have a little bit of wiggle room. Make sure the flaps are on the rollers, the actuator arm is intact, and now we're back into the cockpit. That concludes the pre-flight. And the next videos will continue the flight, essentially startup, taxi, takeoff, and on from there. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. Leave any comments and feedback down below, and I'll see you guys next time.